long process from concept to completed creation. And this process starts by either a drawing or from a combination of drawings or photographs from a person who may be consigning a work from me. This conceptualization process includes the consideration of the expressiveness of the face, hands, the overall stance of the figure to be constructed with suitable sturdy materials, and possible additions such as clothing, hair, and other props. Once these decisions are relatively finalized, alterations can always be considered. I start with a piece of clay. Generally, I begin with sculpting the face, as it's the most exciting and the most expressive part of the sculpture. It is also usually one of the first things that capture the attention of those who view my pieces. The hands and the body positioning must also suggest the character's surroundings and the situation in which it will be placed. Care is taken to make sure the parts are as smoothly sculpted as necessary, as cleanup becomes more difficult after this stage. While sculpting, I make sure no parts of the clay are more dense than an inch, as they may blow up in the firing process, destroying the piece, and possibly surrounding pieces. This sculpting period is also the time to consider props or headpieces that will be added later, with thought as to how things will go together or whether an attaching point needs to be hollowed out or built up. It's important to always think ahead to the steps that will lead up to the final product, to make sure that things can happen in the proper sequence. Once the pieces have been sculpted, they are set aside to dry for several days. Clay that is too moist may explode in the kiln. While the pieces are drying, it's time to work on the body structure. Constructing armature out of wood and wire includes cutting, sanding, drilling, and gluing. It is essential to construct the form in a slightly more exaggerated or extreme pose, as adding the padding and wrapping material will lessen the severity of the lines and angles, and I don't want to lose the excitement or suggested motion of the character. Once the sculpted pieces have dried, they can be fired in the kiln. This is often a day-long or an overnight procedure. After the pieces have been fired and allowed to cool, I remove them from the kiln and it's time for the next exciting phase of the character creation, painting. A good paint job can make the difference between whether a piece looks lifelike or not. Adding a light wash of darker color creates depth, and then I add highlights on cheeks, mouth, and eyes, and I finish with a protective fixative. I attach the head to the wooden body, and now I'm ready to pad and wrap it. Some parts, like hands and feet, may be glued into place after certain costume pieces are put on. Now that the figure looks a little bit more fleshy, it's time to create the costume. I measure the structure to design and cut the clothing pieces. Ease of dressing the figure is taken into consideration. Some pieces may need to be sewed in place on the figure. Once the main pieces of clothing are stitched into place on the figure, it's time to add the hair. Human or fake hair may be used, or raw cleaned wool. It's applied in small sections at a time. I pull the final product all together by adding hands that may have not been attached yet, or attaching props, and finally the feet before gluing and setting the figure into its prepared stand. Additional items may need to be added after it's set for a while to create the final illusion. There are lots of figures on my site for you to look over, and I hope that someday I can make something special just for you. Just remember that it takes a long time from that journey from clay to the final creation.